Hello again and welcome back to another video, and today we're looking at a scenario where Austria-Hungary won the Brothers' War between them and the Prussians. In this scenario, the two largest things that you can see are that Germany is not unified, France is more powerful, Italy is still divided, and of course Austria-Hungary is significantly more powerful. A few other minor changes have happened, which may not be 100% accurate, but I did attempt to do this entirely just by what came off the top of my head, so I will forget a few things. Bulgaria is slightly larger as they gained a few minor territories. Austria-Hungary, well, they are not exactly on the best of terms with Serbia. Those are the extra lands that Bulgaria has here, as Austria-Hungary was pushing for an end to the war. Serbia is claiming a massive portion of Austria-Hungary as their own, which is inhabited by Serbs, Bosnians, Croats, and Slovenes, which are all Southern Slavs. Oh, there we go. We also see that Austria-Hungary now controls a large portion of northern Italy, with all of these lands now being Italian majority, accounting for a decent portion of the empire's size and a massive portion of the empire's economy. They control key regions such as Venice, which are extremely rich and will most definitely benefit this Austro-Hungarian Empire. They didn't just add Italians and Serbians, though. They have also gained Silesia back from the Prussians, which had been taken from them a very, very long time ago, which I think is going to go a long way. It does have some Slavic minorities, but it is mainly made up of Germans, which Austria-Hungary is really going to need here, as their German population, the percent of the population that it makes up, is getting lower and lower by the day. In this video, I'm going to go show two scenarios. One where they survive by downsizing and consolidating around Germany, and one where they completely collapse. In my opinion, the teams would be fairly simple. The French and the Russians would still be aligned closer than the French and the Austrians. The Austrians, well, during the war, the French moved in and seized the Saarland, which Austria was completely against. On this side would also be Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Romania, along with all the Italian states that are currently being supported by France. They would also have Prussia on this side. As for the Austrians, on their side, they would have practically all German kingdoms. Also, Schleswig-Holstein is directly a part of Austria. All German kingdoms that are either under their control or under their influence. They would have Bulgaria, and they would most likely have the United Kingdom, who doesn't want to allow the Russians to get too powerful. Due to this, despite the Ottomans not liking the Bulgarians, the Ottoman Empire would most likely be on Austria-Hungary's side as well. We also see minor Austro-Hungarian colonies in Libya, Austrian Eritrea, and Madagascar, along with Namibia. It's not a massive colonial empire, about the same size as the German one from our timeline, but if the Austrians had managed to defeat the Prussians, I would think that the Hungarians would not have as easy of a time shutting down Austrian ideas for empire. They also control Western Sahara. If you didn't know, in our timeline, they were thinking about purchasing Western Sahara from Spain, but the Hungarian part of the empire shut it down, not allowing them to do so. In this scenario, that would not happen, as the Hungarians have far less control over the nation, after the population is far more in favor of the Austrians due to the war being won and their influence being secured. They would also form a much tighter German confederation. Obviously, you have the Austrians, but also nations like Bavaria, Saxony, Hanover, Mecklenburg. That's part of. You would have everything. Like, all the German states are now much closer together under direct Austrian influence. Instead of the North German Confederation, we may see a South German Confederation under Austrian rule. Although first, let's start off with a few more minor conflicts, a few more minor things that may happen. The Prussians would immediately be the ones that you want to watch. They have been significantly weakened, especially. You might think the loss of Silesia is the worst, which it would be absolutely devastating. The Austrians are now also far closer to reaching Berlin in a future war, meaning that Prussia could not stand up to Austria on their own from their eyes right now forever without at least Russian help, preferably Russian and French help. But a massive loss they also took was the loss of their Rhinish territories, which were divided up between Bavaria and a few new kingdoms. This is a massive loss, as the Rhineland is in one of the richest regions in Europe, next to the heavily industrialized Belgium and northern France, whilst having the major Rhine River to make it one of the most important regions on the continent, and it has now been lost. The Prussians would most obviously want revenge on the Austrians, but I highly doubt that France or Russia would immediately be looking too deep into a war. They do not want to fight Britain. The British Navy is extremely powerful and could most likely blockade them, and with the Austrians not losing the war and gaining a larger coastline in Venice / keeping it, they would be able to build up a fairly respectable fleet as well. Not too large, but respectable enough. The Austrians would also have major influence over Denmark, as they may even return certain territories in return for Denmark blocking off Russian access to the North Sea. This would be absolutely terrible for the Russians, as war against the Ottomans and the Danes would mean they have no way to get out into the Atlantic from their main warm water ports. The French are in a slightly better position. Napoleon III would still be in charge, as the Prussians never went in and humiliated France. We would also see that in Spain, a change not many people would know about is that a French ruler would most likely be put into power. This wouldn't make them a direct French puppet, but it would be interesting to see how closely they align with France, as without a German leader, at least not that I know of, from Austria-Hungary being too involved in Spain, and the Prussians not being able to at all, the French would most likely win out there whilst the war is ongoing. I do not see any short-term wars going on. This is a very delicate balance of power. Even if a small conflict starts, let's say between Belgium and Bavaria, immediately this would spark a world war. Let's assume an even smaller conflict breaks out just between Denmark and Austria. World war. There's just no conflicts that can be made without starting a global conflict. So let's begin that global conflict along the Austrian-Russian border. You can make it in Russia or in northern Italy, but wherever you want, some power is going to invade some other power, and that is going to lead to an immediate war. Perhaps the Serbians do something dumb and assassinate the Archduke again, which is actually where I'm going to change it to start right now. So, very similar thing to our time happens. And now Austria-Hungary is at war with the Russians, the Serbs, and the Montenegrins. Montenegroans? I don't know. But they were at war with Montenegro. Immediately, France would also join into this, bringing in their massive colonial empire. Along with this, without Italy in the Horn of Africa, the British would manage to crush Ethiopia, whilst the French expand into Frenchophore. Would they have any other colonies? Yes, they would still have Southeast Asia and French Guinea. And one change I forgot to add, but I do most likely see happening, is that the British would have full control of New Guinea, as I doubt the Austrians would manage to get that far. Meanwhile, the Austrians immediately on their side would have the British. This is extremely important, as the British colonial empire, together with the Austrian colonial empire, would be significantly larger than the French. The British fleets are also the largest in the world, as they have the largest navy by a long shot. Their other colonies would also supply these two empires with plenty of resources, and by blockading the French and the Russians would immediately start to starve, whilst the French economy would take major hits by the second. From there, Prussia will also nearly immediately join to try and get Silesia back, perhaps even more. From there, I mean, take it as you will. But the true answer is it would just be a slog. The Austrians would not have to worry about the French too much at the beginning, as their German allies have not currently joined. But I do see eventually many more territories here joining, along with Sardinia Piedmont joining nearly immediately. This would be difficult for the Austrians, as it would open up another front. But British aid is coming, and it will get there eventually. The French will begin a small push into northern Italy, whilst the Russians attempt to push over into Galicia and Ukrainian majority regions. The Austrians, meanwhile, would participate mainly in Prussia, as if you can crush the Prussians, they could easily focus on Russia. And honestly, with Russia, it's just a matter of time until the country starves. With a major push immediately capturing Berlin, the Prussians would not last very long. Russian aid is flooding in, but it will not get there in time, as Saxony and Hanover and multiple other smaller German states join into the war, whilst all of Western Prussia falls. Prussia would by this point be nothing more than a rump state, with their only military might coming from Russian reinforcements. It's not exactly what you'd expect from a previous military superpower like them, but they can't really do anything now. Army restrictions were put on them after the war, and Austria, unlike Prussia from our timeline, punished them severely. Over in the west, though, France would make significant progress up into the German minors. They would crush all of western Bavaria and push into Baden and Württemberg. They would not be pro-French. This would be probably the largest issue for the Austrians, as currently they are fighting this war on their own. British aid has not yet arrived in full force, which means they can't really push just quite yet. Their immediate goal of capitulating Prussia has succeeded, but Russia has continued to bash their heads into the Austrian Empire, making, frankly, crazy progress into northern Austria. Down here with Serbia, Austria-Hungary would have the immediate advantage by far. They would push all over the Montenegrin coast, capitulating the country with ease, and capture the Serbian capital within a few weeks. This is not the incompetent Austrian Empire that we saw from our timeline, but instead a country with high morale, a reinvigorated army, and one of the most modern forces in the world. At this point, all German minors have joined in on the Austrian side, which is going to help them. These armies will manage to consolidate the front, holding back the French, to an extent even managing to push back, now that the Brits are starting to arrive. Over in Africa, which I'm not going to talk about too much, as it is not the most important front, but the French would lose. They are completely on their own, and they have multiple fronts on in the European theater to worry about. The Austrians really wouldn't send troops here, as they have to carry the mainland European fronts all by themselves, at least for now. But the British would immediately seize many French assets, as all of French Central Africa falls, the French Afar falls, and much of French West Africa falls as well. The only place where France would be doing well in Africa is by capturing the Austrian West Sahara. That is really not too much progress to be made, and possibly most devastatingly, in Vietnam, or modern-day Vietnam, the British make a landing and capitulate the entire colony, which is a major blow to French ambitions in the region. Along with this, French Guinea is captured. You might think, how are they getting over there? Well, Guyana is actually a British colony, along with multiple other areas, including Canada. I'm not going to color them in completely, but Canada is going to be on the British side here. Possibly already as a dominion, but still very much so integrated into the British system. The British would also continue to push up into French Africa, capturing most of the sub-Saharan region, and even starting a mass invasion, capturing all of Tunisia, and threatening Algeria. The French are getting pushed out of Africa, and there's really not that much they can do about it. So France decides to dedicate their forces to one of the richest regions of Austria, in a hope to get the rest of Italy on their side, possibly even unite the Italian peninsula, and get that as a powerful ally to use in the war. Maybe if they can even capture a few major cities in core Austrian territories, they can get a favorable peace treaty which would stop Austrian ambitions immediately. This would happen in northern Italy, where the key city of Venice is captured, and in Germany, where the entire Rhine region falls. France is really giving it all they got, and they are winning. The one place where Austria is dominating is in Serbia, where Bulgaria finally decides to join into the war fully. They would begin a push into the east, and Serbia would capitulate very, very quickly. Romania at this point would also join into the war, but I have no doubt that Bulgaria and Austria combined can rush down the nation before Russian troops can even arrive. This major consolidation of the Balkans is going to be great, as that is one less front they have to worry about, and Greece is seeming to be neutral for now. They will most likely not join on the Austrian side, but perhaps if some minor concessions are made to the Greeks, they will stay neutral throughout the rest of the war. The Ottomans are also getting very, very close to being convinced to join in, as just many people think that it is best to stand by the British, perhaps push back the Russians, and secure their own empire. They are falling apart currently, and picking a side, which is what they did in our timeline, was really their only option to survive. The Austrians would begin to push back the Russian forces, as the Russians are starting to feel the effects of a major blockade. Unluckily for the Austrians and the British, Russia is a massive nation. If they just had some time to industrialize in our timeline, they would have been an absolute force to be reckoned with. And with the recapture of Venice, as French troops are undersupplied, the Italians are struggling. One big thing does happen, and that is that Tuscany, Greece, is overthrown and put under Italian control. Along with this, the Papal States are being pressured to give up most of their lands to a new Italian force. The only reason why the Papal States are still alive is due to French support, and thus they are forced to give up their entire north to the new Italian kingdom. This is in an effort to make northern Italy self-reliant, so that the French no longer have to send an immense amount of forces to hold the region. This is where it's going to start to diverge, and I'm going to make two different timelines of what could happen. One which leads to a total Austrian victory, and one which leads to Austria collapsing and falling apart entirely. We're going to start with the collapse one. In this scenario, the Prussians, who are incredibly proud and incredibly angry about losing the first war, and now the second war, are going to start to rise up. The British are still going to manage to kick the French out of Africa, but once again, not really the most important theater, as France is going to once again push into northern Italy and capture Venice. This time, this is going to cause the entire Austrian line to break completely, and whilst Austria sends troops to deal with that, managing to push back the French quite effectively, the French are going to send massive amounts of forces over into southern Germany. They're also going to push into northern Germany, capitulating Hanover, and pushing into Schleswig-Holstein, which is massively undersupplied and underprepared for this invasion. The Russians would also manage major successes, and as it looks less and less likely that the Brits and the Austrians are going to win, and it looks more and more likely that the Austrians are going to surrender, the British are not going to send any troops, instead still just absolutely pestering French fleets, crushing French naval powers, and taking French colonies. In this way, Britain hopes to get a reasonable peace treaty in which they lose nothing and a certain balance of power can still remain. All of northern Germany, though, has at this point fallen to French forces, and multiple Prussian militias rise up around Berlin, recapturing the city and setting back up a decently powerful Prussian state. This Prussian state would manage to push back incredibly against now struggling Austrian forces. Logistics is a nightmare for the Austrians at this point, and Bulgaria is starting to consider signing a separate peace treaty in which they would gain some lands from Romania and Serbia, whilst getting themselves a new government in the process. This is all going to be decided in the battles for Istria, which the French win, crushing the Austrian navy and stopping a lot of British troops from going into Austria, a lot of British goods and colonial goods from shipping in, and overall making the Austrians more and more unstable. At this point, the Hungarians, who were significantly less powerful in this scenario, are starting to rise up. This war seems completely impossible to win, and on top of the already incredibly dire situation, Greece has not been convinced, not even to neutrality anymore, as the Bulgarians do not want to give up lands, and Greece joins against them. The Ottomans would also stop supporting the British and the Austrians at all, seeing there to be no point, whilst it seems more and more likely that the Spanish may join in on the French side as well, as the new Spanish king, a French noble who has taken over, who I forgot the name of, is heavily inclined to join the French side, being promised colonies and possibly even Sardinia as a prize if they join in now. The Russians would continue to bash their heads into the Austrian side, which is going to be horrible for Austrian forces who are now facing rebellion in their own regions. The Hungarians would rise up completely, allowing Russian forces to sweep the region, and Romanian resistance fighters would recapture much of their territory. Bulgaria would simply decide that this was not worth it, and despite not losing any land, they would sign a white peace with the Allied powers. This would allow the Balkans to be recaptured, and with Hungary being completely against them, Czech resistance fighters starting to rise up, and in Germany, Prussia starts a massive amount of campaigning for a united German state under their rulership. All of this eventually combines into an Austrian surrender, hoping to get at least decent terms, whilst the British continue to basically threaten the French and the Russians to give up and give them a reasonable peace treaty, in which the Austrians lose few lands and the British might even gain some colonies. This peace treaty will destroy Austria. First of all, in Italy, they will lose most of their Italian territories, if not all, to a new North Italian state, which is soon hoping to expand into southern Italy as well, with full French backing. In Bosnia and Croatia, the Serbians will take control, gaining most of the lands which they could have hoped for. The Bulgarians will be somewhat hurt, as the Serbians will take a small amount of land, the Greeks will take a small amount of land, and even the Romanians will take a small amount of land. This is still a larger Bulgaria than in our timeline, but still hurt and still very much so wishing that they hadn't lost these territories. I don't think they mind the Grecian territories that much, but they are still hoping to gain Macedonia at a future time. The Romanians would be granted much of Transylvania for their efforts and their losses in the war, whilst a greater Hungarian state would be set up. This Hungarian state would be quite powerful, actually, as the Russians were backing, making it a at least fairly powerful power in Central Europe to counteract any future Austrian actions. The Prussians would regain Silesia and all the lands that correspond to that. Along with this, Bohemia or Czechia would be given independence, whilst the rest of Austria is set up as a smaller state under Austrian leadership. In Germany, there would be a complete reorganization of the territory. We can delete pretty much all previous borders and see what it has come to. It would be terrible for absolutely anyone who isn't French or Prussian. All German nobility that had been there previously will be shut down. They will now either bow to the Prussians or the French, nothing in between. The French would gain all of the Rhineland and the region surrounding it, whilst the Prussians would form a North German Confederation, whilst the South would be set up as a Prussian, basically a land state, under the previous Bavarian crown that has now been pretty much Prussianized completely and turned into a Prussian puppet. Austria would be turned into a French puppet, whilst the Russians, who have expanded massively into northern Austria, would also be given a lot of influence in the region. In Africa, there would be kind of a destruction of any and all French efforts. The British would seize all Austrian assets and take full control of the continent. Northern Africa, including Algeria and Morocco, would still be under French control, but the rest of Africa would be handed over to the British. Basically, all of Africa is now just British. Same thing for Asia, where French East Asia is taken entirely by the British, which is going to secure the entire world for Britain except for mainland Europe. They would also either destroy or take over French, Russian, and Austrian ships to ensure that no one could ever challenge their dominance again. Now, this video has already gone on long enough, so I am not going to show the Austrian victory scenario, which would still not be amazing, but if you want to see that, I would make a part 2 where I show exactly just how well this could have gone for the Austrians, who were barely any stronger in this scenario than they were in real life. I do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you, and well, yeah, I think I am going to end it there. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.